And then we're mad at that person because they're being themselves when they've been that same person for years now, but I chose to ignore it because I didn't want to get left. I didn't want to get abandoned. I wanted to be likable. I wanted to win them over. So I just let it go until one day it's like, I don't like you anymore.
They're not really reacting to their partner. They're reacting to this little narrative, this little internal fable they have in their minds, which generates so much misery, so much stress, and then they project it their partner.
Surely some things have changed, but like you said, do I still have this old image of who I met, 9 years ago, and I'm totally ignoring the beautiful version of the woman in front of me today? And that is a true thing for me,
Welcome to the Authentic Man podcast. I am your host, David Chambers. This is a podcast for men who want more and less from life. More deep connection, more emotional intelligence, more self-awareness, and more great sex. And less heartache, less conflict, less overthinking, and less stress. Creating dating lives, sex lives, and relationships that are incredible and authentic. My deepest goal is that you, the listener, can take away what you hear in this podcast and apply it to your life so that you can experience greater happiness, transformational growth, deeper relationships, and profound sexual intimacy. I believe that as men, we are capable of so much more depth than we are shown or led to believe. So join me as we get deep into this. Welcome back to another episode of Authentic Man Podcast. I'm your host, David Chambers, and I'm a men's dating, relationship, and intimacy coach. I don't always say that at the beginning of episodes, but I also really get deep into our visions and ideas of masculinity and how that affects our relationships, how that affects our dating lives, our intimacy, but as men, our lives in general. This is something that is I'm really passionate about, and I'm seeing huge shifts in men when we focus on that particular piece as well as the dating and relationship stuff. But today I am joined by a wonderful man called Brian Jenkins, and he's a relationship coach like myself. And he's kind of specializes in working with couples and people in relationship. And he talks a lot about the intricacies of how we can weather the storms and difficulties in our relationship. And we actually really talk about a particular technique that he uses in helping couples kind of get out of continual cycles of arguments. This is something that I see in the couples work that I do with Orsa. It's like so many couples are stuck in cycles of arguments or the same argument again and again, and they're getting nowhere. And all it's doing is creating more rupture, more disconnection, more pain, and actually pulling them apart and creating more resentment. And resentment can be very difficult to shift in relationship. We talk about that, but we also talk about what to do if your partner is not doing the work, right? This is a question I've asked a few people on the podcast, and he gives his ideas about this, and I talk a little bit about that as well. We talk about calling our partners forward, like calling out the highest version of our partner, that more exalted, more communicative, more wise, the king or the queen in our partner. How do we call that person forward? And we talk a lot about our own personal struggles with conflicts in relationships, and how we've weaved and dodged through these things as well. So, as well as the whole thing where we become opponents and adversaries in a relationship, and what damage that does and how we can get out of that cycle. So a lot of wonderful things in the episode. And I'll let you know if you are interested in this sort of couples work. Me and also we do couples coaching, where we bring the couples together and we work with you individually as well to really help you develop more closeness, more love, while getting over any arguments and disagreements that can, that you're just fixed in, that you can't get out of. We're really about helping couples be deeply connected, reconnected emotionally, mentally, spiritually, and sexually as well. So if you're interested in that, you can just pop me an email, the details in the show notes. Without further ado, I'll let you get into the episode. Welcome back, listeners. We're going to tackle a topic that is incredibly important and something that I work with really with relationships, right? It's just the way that we relate, the way that we deal with our conflicts, our storms, the emotions of relationship. We're going to dive into that. And I've got a wonderful man here, a relationship coach who I've connected with recently on Instagram, and really just loved the way he delivers this powerful truth in such a simple way that we can just digest and also make us reflect on ourselves. I got today with me, Brian. How are you doing?
Mm-hmm. Bro, I'm doing amazing. Even more excited to be here with you today to see what magic we're going to create, but I'm doing really good.
Fantastic. And, Brian is actually situated not that far from me in terms of, geographical distance. He's down in the Canary Islands on Gran Canaria, but I was telling him before, from Madeira to get there is an absolute nightmare, because even though it's a simple flight and you could probably, I'm not going to say swim because, there's no way I'm going to swim that distance.
Let's go on, David. Step it up, man. Try it. Don't say no.
Get a little cap and a nose and go for it, man. But he's not too far away. But for the listeners, Brian, I'd love you to talk about the work that you do now and your journey to getting to doing that work and bringing that work to the world.
Yeah. Thanks for giving me permission before to take up some space, because shortening things is not really my strength. So the work broadly happened about 5 years ago, just after my wife and I, we had 2 weddings, one here in Gran Canaria, one back in the States in Orlando, for both sides of the family. Leading up to that family, leading up to the weddings, just found myself really doing a lot, trying to prove myself in regards to the kind of husband I wanted to be before we got married. I was launching a product on Kickstarter that I was really excited about. I thought it was going to be like my game changer, because it was going to be successful. I was going to make tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars off of that, and essentially doing a lot to try to survive here in the islands. It's just there aren't too many opportunities on the island for, at that time, a non-native Spanish speaker. And on the back end of coming from the honeymoon, I found myself burnt out. Completely gassed. I didn't really know what was wrong with me. I thought it was perhaps jet lag. I knew it was probably some exhaustion, because, as you can imagine, like organizing 2 weddings, 2 families, and 2 everything. But it was something more than that. And what I recognized quickly was it was depression mixed with burnout and mixed with just self-loathing of not knowing what I was doing with my life, which was very contrary to how I lived my life before that. Before that, coming to Europe, I was in London for an MBA. Before that, I had a nice community in Orlando and Jacksonville with all my contacts. And so somewhere in that transition, I found myself like in straight survival mode, trying to make sense of everything. And so anyway, when I recognized that I was in bad shape after the honeymoon, I didn't know what I had to change. Something had to change. I remember actually saying to myself, I don't remember when or exactly the exact words, but something to the effect of, I don't want to do this anymore. Right? Like the way that just life felt, I was, very edgy with my fiance, then my then wife. I felt like I was moving around a lot, but then not doing anything. I wasn't really getting closer to a goal. I just didn't feel happy, to be honest with you. There was very few moments where I felt happy. Everything just felt like a struggle, And so that was the part. I was just like, something has to change. And so I just dove into the thing that I used to laugh at people before. I used to mock, like personal development. Like, that's for the people who don't have their shit together. That's for the people who don't know what they want to do in life. That's for the people who are soft emotionally and all these different things, right? So then I found myself like, I don't know where else to go. Let me just try this stuff, So anyway, that sent me off on a journey to just self-discovery. Got into one of my first, my first men's space with a man named Preston Smiles. He was a coach and still a former mentor of mine, and changed my life. The program absolutely changed my life and got me to see a lot of the things that I didn't think about looking at. For example, like what is my vision in life? Like, what do I want to do with myself? And 2, like what is the vision for myself? Like, I never really considered that specifically for myself. I had professional visions, like career visions and goals and financial visions, but towards myself, how I be as Brian, I really never thought about it in that way. And so moving along the path, my wife and I, we had some challenges. We found out about 3 years ago that she had a very large cyst on her uterus, which prevented us from having kids. And so that definitely rocked our world and rocked my world. It rocked my vision of me being a father and what kind of husband I was going to be. And in this space of wanting to support her, wanting to understand, how to keep myself like sane and solid, I recognize that this isn't easy. Like there's no manual for my life. There's no manual for situations like this. Although other people have had similar experiences around the relationships and somewhat of a grieving process. Although we didn't lose a child, I lost the vision that I have a child, and there's a grieving process that came with that. And so recognizing like, even though I was solid in how I wanted to show up, like as the best man, the best husband I could possible for her and for myself, I just feel like I was fucking up. Like I feel like I was just missing the mark. Like I was still getting irritated. I was, sometimes still snapping at her, and recognizing that it's challenging, And so when I started talking to more men, I recognized that I wasn't unique to me, and that there's a lot of men out there who really do want to be the best, boyfriend, husband, partner they can for their queen. But then sometimes like there's just some things that get thrown at us and we don't know what to do with it. And then we end up kind of getting knocked off track, and some of us give up. We say, what's the point? And so essentially in a long-winded way, that's what got me to now working specifically with couples, helping them be individually sound with themselves, to understand their own authentic voice, both men and women, and then separate programs for men and women to help them prepare them for partnership. So that way they can go into the partnership whole and complete, and then not needing their partner to do something for them or to solve their problems or to make them feel better. So that was the big nutshell of it.
And I'm always, I always see with the various guests and people I speak to do this sort of work, the sort of work that you and I do, it's like it's always through some of our own pain. It's always through some of our own difficulty. Very rarely, if ever, have I spoken to a man and they've gone, oh yeah, I came to this because, it just made logical sense as the next part of my career progression.
Right. Yeah. Well, I tell you, actually, when I first started, I started going to work with the more executive men, higher-powered men, high-performing men, because that's how I viewed myself before. And it was rewarding in getting the results, but still it lacked something for me, because still working with these men, although they achieved their goals, there's still something there that wasn't satisfying them on a deeper level. And so, but likewise was me, which I told you about, going back into falling into my depression after the weddings. That was it. Like I just got married. This should have been the happiest time of my life, like had 2 beautiful weddings, but I came back and I was like gutted, So really it being able to look deeper in, like that's what led me to, and then come into relationships as well, But I'll be honest with you, I don't know about you, but for me, like there was a lot of initial resistance, especially in the relationship space, because where I found that I wasn't, for my standard, able to live my standard every single day, rock solid, there's resistance to stepping in and put my hand out to guide other men. And in couples in that space, we're like, well, shit, I haven't figured it out yet every single day. So who am I to tell other people, But then coming back to remind myself, well, that's kind of part of, to me, my philosophy of life is that's the journey of it. I don't need to have this completely figured out and be free from any kind of like, duress in my relationship. Like it's going to come, but where's my mind at to be able to handle this differently every time it comes up,
Yeah, it's, I have a very active inner critic, and it loves to tell me that I'm not qualified to do what I do. And it's even there's times I found it's actually been a blessing. Like, me and my partner, we also work with couples, and the couple might come and they'll be talking to us, and they'll be like, we're having this problem. And I'll be like, yeah, we have that same problem. And they'll go, okay. I'll say, so what do you do to deal with it? And then they tell you that they don't really deal with it in any way. And you go, okay, and I often start with, it's like, did you listen? Have you tried listening to each other? And they're like, yeah, of course we're listening to each other. I'm like, okay, so tell me, how does this listening go, this discussion go? And what it does is almost put me in a position of like naivety, I'm not the all-knowing. I don't know everything. Right. So I'm just going to be asking very simple questions because I have these problems too. My relationship is not perfect. It's good, but we still run into roadblocks and difficulties. Sometimes I still fall into my old habit of shutting down and not talking about how I feel. But instead of, years ago, or when we first met, even me and my partner were together for 4 years, I could shut down and not talk for basically, a week quite easily. Yeah. Now it's like I might shut down and not talk for a few hours, Right, and then I catch myself and I'm like, I'm not communicating. And sometimes the communication might just be, hey, like I don't really feel like talking right now. It's not about you. I just don't feel like talking. And she'll go, okay, cool, great. All right, I'll see you later on tonight. And And it's like, wow, like that might not seem in my mind is going, oh, you're not good enough to be a coach. You don't know. But it's just like, fuck, that's a long way to come in our lives because, you know, I speak to couples who've been together for 10, 20 years and they're still in the stage where one of them shuts down and stops talking for a week. And there's zero communication and there's lots of projection and so forth. So like sometimes I'm grateful for my inner critic and obviously sometimes I really am not.
Yeah. Bro, well, I'm with you on that, you know, and as we talked about, we opened up, being able to move through the storm of your wife's emotions. I mean, this is exactly what you said. This has been my experience. And sometimes I feel myself getting lost in that hurricane. And I only phrase it as a storm. So for any women who are out there, it's not to say that you or your emotions are too much, but if we're not prepared and ready, it can feel like a damn storm, right? So it's being able to say, okay, like, why is it the way it's coming at me? Why am I receiving it this way? Am I receiving it that way? And for like what you said, at least what I heard is it's just information. It's just more information about what I'm not maybe prepared to deal with, what I don't want to deal with, or what is it that I thought I dealt with and I didn't, right? And so, in these places of being able to guide others, it's a reminder of myself. And again, when I tell the couples as well, or just even the people in general, is we're always in growth. We're always in evolution. To me, there is no one day you're going to be done. I mean, there's going to be a day that, I think, being confident about who you are today, like who you be today is cool, but then knowing that you're always growing, especially as a couple. You guys are changing, you're getting to know each other every single day differently. So there's never going to be a day where it's just all figured out. And if there is, one of y'all or both of y'all are lying because you're hiding from it because it just doesn't, there's no growth in that, but remind myself of that. I get to see that when I'm talking to my clients as well. So it's always a gift to see what they move through. It's like, Brian, you forgot about that part too. That's why you keep falling in that damn trap. Like, go back and get the work done,
And I guess off the back of that, what came to my mind is, as in relationship, one of the things that we kind of fall into this trap, I think, is like we see each other as fixed beings. Like, I've met this person. I'm going to put this out there and say, I think men are more prone to this. It's like, I met my partner and it's like we put a tack in who they are. Like, I met them in 2016 and this was their attributes and values and thoughts and ideas. That is who they are. We staple that into a part of our mind and we go, that's who they are. And we just go, cool, that's who they are. And then like 10 years later, we're 12, even now it's like 7-8 years later, we're talking to them, but we're still talking to that version of them that we pinned in our head.
Yes.
And this is where I see a lot of trouble and strife, to use Cockney rhyming slang, in relationship happens is because we're not talking to the person who's in front of us. We're talking to this kind of persona that we've held on to from before. I don't know. I wonder if this is something you see with some of the couples and the men that you work with.
Yeah, look, to me, I'm all about, putting it out there, and I'll say, forget even, yes, and I still find that show up in myself. And one recent thing that's actually almost using the exact same words that you just said right now is I recognize that even though the vision that I have of my union with my wife and of my wife is beautiful, is with the best intention, like, and how I see her showing up and how I see myself showing up and what we're doing in this big, beautiful vision, what I caught myself doing is being very attached to that vision. And so when my wife, in this movie that I've mapped out, it's detailed, it has so much color and texture and sounds to it. When my wife in the real life doesn't meet that, or even myself, I start telling myself a story of like, oh, see, that's why you ain't about this life. See, that's why things aren't going right because you don't take it seriously, which is not the case, right? I mean, it's just a simple sign of having these conversations and getting to know each other again, which is why the communication and active communication about sharing where we are at any given stage of our life, to me, is so important. Don't wait until you guys have a clash. Don't wait until the disagreement comes. Like, carve out some time and actually have if you want to call it a date night, if you want to call it sacred time together, whatever it is, but just share what's most alive for you today or this week or this month, and maybe revisit these values. But in a fun way. Those things you used to like back in the day, like, you still like those? We've been together for 9 years, my wife and I. Surely some things have changed, but like you said, do I still have this old image of who I met, 9 years ago, and I'm totally ignoring the beautiful version of the woman in front of me today. And that is a true thing for me, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting. Me and my partner had, this was early this year. No, it was actually last year. We had a plant medicine experience, and for her, it was really profound, and maybe wasn't as so profound for myself. And after she was talking about it I think it was like the next week, we were talking about it, and she was just like, I feel like I've changed as a person. And I remember my ears being like, there's part of my brain that was like, really? And I was being lazy. Right in this moment. I was like, yeah, whatever. I was, man, I'm sure some of you listening, you could tell this. Like, they're telling you they're changing. They're telling you this new information. And there's a lazy part of your mind that's like, nah, don't believe it, because you don't want to update the persona. You don't want to have this new information, because then you have to start looking at her differently. And a number of weeks after that moment, we were talking again, and I think I just had more capacity to hear it. And she was really telling me all the ways and the new ways she was thinking about herself. So I asked her questions. I was like, so, we used to do this thing, or used to like that thing. Are you saying like now you're not really feeling that thing? And a few of those things and situations, she was like, no, I wouldn't want to do that again. I wouldn't want to do that like that. And it, as you say, it just gives us that space to kind of, let's take this. I worked in tech for 16 years. So it's like you get to update the program that you have about your partner, right? You take in the new information, you download the patch, and you take in this new information, and you edit that persona you have of them, because then, you can relate to this new person in front of you, because, the worst thing you could ever do is, not the worst thing, but like one of the worst things a relationship can do, in my opinion, is like, you spend your whole time relating to this persona that's outdated, and then years down the line, you're suddenly faced with who your partner is, and you're like, wait, like we got nothing in common anymore. We got nothing in our relationship anymore, because we haven't actually been present with each other for so long.
Right. Yeah. D, there's so much goodness in that, and that part right there, which I also think contributes to the storms and challenges that many couples may feel, especially when they start doing this work. Because as you mentioned, a lot of people, when they get into like these first kind of courtships, these relationships, it's always really nice. And we want to put our best on, our best clothes, our best smelling stuff. And we're so agreeable. We laugh at everything. And we don't want to say any things that are like a big deal. And things that do bother us, we're like, don't worry about it. When inside, it's like, it could be a thing. And we just keep on going through because we want to win this person. But as you mentioned, like once it comes down to it, that wears off. That like new car smell wears off over time. And now you have to start saying, oh, okay, that's really how you are. And then we're mad at that person because they're being themselves when they've been that same person for years now, but I chose to ignore it because I didn't want to get left. I didn't want to get abandoned. I wanted to be likable. I wanted to win them over. So I just let it go until one day it's like, I don't like it anymore. Or let's flip it on the other side. The partner who may have been hiding these behaviors, these attributes, because they also didn't want to get rejected or left or anything like that. And so now you can only keep an act up for so long. Then it starts coming out. And then they say, oh, well, you don't accept me for who I am? Well, I didn't know who you were. You're just now finally showing me that person. Do you know what I mean? So it's this funny dynamic where it's okay for one to be able to really get to know each other again, but honestly, without judging each other. Without, criticizing yourself, without criticizing them, because you both probably came into it ignoring some things. That's one part of it. And the other part is, let's just say, like, you really see this stuff now, and you really are practicing, like, self-love and what your values are, and this person isn't aligned, that's also okay. You don't have to force yourself to be with that person. If you find, like, oh, wow, like, I've been, like, totally hiding myself. I've been forgetting about myself just to stay with this person so they wouldn't leave me, and now you find that you don't want to do that anymore, your partner may not be the one for you. But it doesn't have to be a bad thing. They don't have to be the enemy. They don't have to be the bad guy or the bad girl because they're no longer the thing for you anymore. But being able to have a conscious upcoupling as well is like a beautiful process. But again, it's like, I don't want to be the wrong one. I don't want to make the decision. So I'm going to make you the bad girl, the bad guy. And it starts getting this constant fight until they hate each other. And then it's just this how do you say this energy that's lingering unnecessarily.
It's like they create this energy of resentment in the relationship when really what could have just happened is two people realizing they weren't right for each other, as you said, and going, hey, we're not aligned anymore. Like, let's go our separate ways. And I find this an interesting one because it's almost a bit like I think as human beings, often we have a habit of, if we want to leave somewhere or we want to go somewhere else, like, I left London a number of years ago and I'm going to be moving back soon, that we often create the conditions of not liking where we are.
Yes.
So it's like we unconsciously create like a dislike or an unhappiness where we are as a way to push us to where we want to be. But it's really an unnecessary process, right? We don't need to do that. And it's a similar thing in relationship where one person feels or both people feel they're not happy in the relationship. Yeah. So instead of going, well, actually, I'm not happy in the relationship. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with me. This just isn't right. They create mentally and outside of themselves the problems so that then they can say, well, there's something wrong with this that I need to leave. It's a phenomenon I've seen in myself in the past and in friends as well.
Oh, David, 100%. And it happens too often. And to me, and some people may find this offensive to hear it, but to me, it's just a lack of emotional intelligence and maturity, which is no judgment there. This is coming from someone who has moved wholly through that, but not totally out of it. I've still been noticing, again, talking about my current state, like with my wife as well, where I am too emotionally dependent on her feedback. Right? To get the validation that I am doing the best I can to support her through her health conditions and to be a good listener and patient, all these things. I find myself when I don't get that feedback, I can still be too emotional because I want to feel like I'm doing the best job I can. Now that's an area for me to recognize where I'm still emotionally immature or don't have it as clear as I like to within myself. And so during that, there's a phase where I was making her the bad one for it. She doesn't appreciate me. She doesn't see my effort. She doesn't know a good thing when she sees it, all these different things versus saying, well, Brian, what's the truth of what she's saying? Like, just what is the truth in that? Can you do things differently for her and for you? And the answer was yes. But I didn't want to see the yes for a long time because then that meant I had to take ownership of it. Going back to our, the previous part of this conversation about having to do something about it. Like once you know, then you have to act on it, or just keep on avoiding it and hope that it goes away. But that's also a part where I see a lot of couples get stuck is the unwillingness to just see their part in it. Let's say my part is only 5%. If we can put a numerical value on the situation, if my part is 5%, then own the shit out of that 5%. It doesn't mean that they don't have to work on their thing, but just own your 5% and move forward. But no one wants to own anything because then I have to change. No, you were more wrong. You did the thing. You are less patient more often, so you should do the work. No, I'm going to sit here and just wait till you fix it. And it's like, this doesn't work. At least to me, it doesn't work that way.
No. And what do you think about how, it's a dynamic that I get asked a lot about, and I imagine you do as well, where there's one partner that's like doing the work. They're doing the work, they're trying to be better, and the other partner isn't, right? And the dynamic I usually come across, and this is just because I think I'm a man talking about this stuff, is I get women come up into my DMs and they're like, my partner's not doing the work. What do I do? He won't do the work. Now, I'm saying this out loud to all the listeners as well, is this isn't the only way around. Like I've got clients who are men whose partners are female who are not doing the work. But I'd love to know your take on this and on what people can do. It's like, what do you do if you're in a relationship and one of you is like committed to doing the work, delving into the emotional stuff of the past, like doing the shadow work, bringing it to the light, being more authentic, more whole, all that, embodying our true selves. And the other partner is just like not. It's just staying where they are, being the way they've always been. Like, what's your kind of take on that? What's your kind of thoughts on what people can do?
So one, it's a real thing. But even before, so acknowledging it's a real thing, my question, actually, I'm asking you, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. How do you know that they're doing the work, and what does it mean to you that they're doing the work, and how do you know it's enough, that they're doing enough work?
Yeah, this is always a good, and this is, funny enough, this is one of my starting points with the men when I'm working with them. I'm like, okay, are you paying a lip service to doing the work? Right? Because usually I'm working with the men. At least then, if I'm working with the man, I'm working with him. We got 90-minute sessions as weekly or every other week. I'm like, okay, so you're doing the work. Let's see, are you really doing it? Are you really doing it? Or are you just paying lip service? Like, you can go and buy these courses and you can come and rock up to the sessions with me and we can talk. But then when you walk out of this, you're not doing anything. You're not actioning or actualizing the things we talk about in your relationship.
Yeah.
So let's just say that they're coming and they're communicating better. They're looking at their emotional stuff and they're taking more responsibility and ownership for how they're showing up. That's a good part of the work, and also learning about our own childhood wounding and trauma and so forth, and trying to heal some of that and not be reactive from that in the space of relationship.
Yeah.
But the other partner is still doing all the shit. They're still being really reactive and blaming and pointing the finger and so forth. But the partner who's doing the work wants to stay in the relationship. That's often the dynamic.
Yes. Yeah. So let me kind of just pull this out in 3 parts. So first part is for these couples. They need to be able to sit down and have a conversation and understand what the work means to each person, right? Because what I believe is the work for me and what I'm moving through is going to look and feel very different to my partner. And so for me, when I'm really digging into my shit and it's hard stuff and I'm seeing her kind of going through the motions, and it's like, you're not even trying. I don't know. Maybe for her, she is trying. Maybe that thing that seems insignificant to me is really like moving mountains for her. Do I really know what it means to her? So first, having a conversation of what it means for both of you being the work is going to help. Let's assume that your partner's just really kind of like, they don't need to see anything. Like they're really saying like, I'm good. Like, and you're really digging in. I'm good. Like I don't need to do anything. Then before you make any kind of action, I'd say, okay, cool. Then what is the trigger for you that you feel like you want them to do more work? Going back to what I shared about myself, is there an expectation that you're attached to the vision of what the work looks like for her or him? Or what it looks like you want? Is there some impatience you want to get there quicker? Like there's nothing wrong with that. It's just information for you. So really understand like what is it that's triggering, that's coming up in you that's not happening with your partner that you want to happen? And is there something in you that you're not looking at? Again, detach yourself from the outcome, being more patient, whatever it may be. And then the last thing, let's just say you've done that. You've tried to have the conversation, or you had the conversation, you're clear on what the work looks like for them. You've really kind of taken a scan on like where you're at like emotionally with the situation, and you've established your values, what's important to you, and really what you want. Then if you're still not getting what you want, leave. Leave. And I'm saying that plainly because at the end of the day, you have no control over that person. None whatsoever. The only person you have control over or command over is your own emotions, your own experience. So while it is that you feel, if you are convinced that they are not doing the work at the pace you want and the way you want, then leave. You deserve to be happy, and so do they. But don't make them the bad person because you feel like they're not trying enough. If they're not trying enough for your standards, own your values, own where you are, and leave. Rather than kind of keep saying like I'm suffering because then walk away. And I see, and this is again, especially with the men, where I get this kind of complaint often, and I'm very direct with them. They say, "Well, what do you mean? Because I thought I came to you to stay with her." For sure, if you want that, but if you're not going to, if you want me to somehow magically tell you why it is that she's not doing her part or the work, and somehow give her a pill when she's not in our sessions to make her feel better so you feel better, I can't do that. It comes down to you. So what are you willing to do or not do? If you're suffering, I do not want you to suffer. If you are suffering because they are just not doing it, then leave with grace and love and say, you know what, I love everything. If there's things I really love about you, but there's certain things I'm not getting. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. These things are really important to me. The way we're moving through this isn't acceptable to me. The way that you're approaching these things is really draining for me, and I value those things, and I choose to have these things. And so because I haven't gotten these things in X amount of months, in X amount of years, I think it's just best that we're not together, or it's just best that I'm not with you. Own it and leave. So that would be the long / short answer to that.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that people don't want to necessarily go to is the walking away, the leaving piece, is that they want to somehow change their partner. And I get it. Sometimes I've met people where they're in relations they've been in, for 10 years. And, there's children involved and things like that. And it's messy. And they're like, but they're not getting what they want. And my take often is like, I think you mentioned it there, patience. It's like, how patient are you being? Like, are you wanting this all right now? Because suddenly you've decided that this isn't, they should be different.
Yeah.
And I think, as I said in the piece before, it's like, really like, look at yourself. Like, how are you showing up like in the relationship? Because sometimes what we do is we think we're doing all this work And it's working outside the relationship, right? We're communicating better with our parents and our friends and our work colleagues and all that. But when we go back into a relationship, we go back into our drama and we communicate from drama, and our partner isn't experiencing us as transformed in any way. They're experiencing us in the way they always have. And I say is when our partners, one of the ways that I think can really trigger a partner to start to do the work or to shift and change is when they start to experience you as different, as someone who is like no longer being reactive to jealousy or petty arguments and stuff like that. They'll start to go, wait, something's different here. This is better. Like, what's going on with you? And I've seen it in couples. I've seen it with couples where one of the partners is like really putting in, you know, they've gone through some level of awakening for whatever reason. And the other partner's like, wait, there's something different about you. What are you doing? Or they know what they're doing and they're like, like, what's that podcast you were talking about the other day? Or what that program you did? Like, you know, they see something for themselves. Like they see a piece that they see in their partner and they're like, I would like some of that. Like, I'm not saying it's going to happen all the time because some people, you know, they don't see it, but I've witnessed it both personally from friends and I've seen it in clients where the transformation of one person can trigger another person to start to change how they are. Yes. But equally, if we do the work because we want our partners to do the work, this is people won't like this one. Yes. If you do this, right, you are setting up a transaction. You're setting yourself up for a transaction. I'm doing this, so you do this, right? And you're also setting yourself up for disappointment because you got an attachment, right, to how it has to look. And if it doesn't look in that way, you're going to be disgruntled and annoyed, and they'll experience you as disgruntled and annoyed, and that will not be a transformed experience for them in that dynamic.
No, David, that's a big one. That's a big one to recognize and bring to people's attention because it's essentially, I don't know if you read the book, No Murder, Mr. Nice Guy, but it sounds like I would call it like a covert agreement, essentially. Like I'm doing this with the understanding that I'm going to get something from this very specific from that. I'm not going to let you know why I'm doing the work, but I'm going to do it with the expectation that you're going to somehow change, you know? And so it comes back to that honest communication about where we're at and what you'd like to see, like with your partner. And also owning whatever your standard is. Because you said something about like the self-reflection piece is, are you really being patient? And so my take on this is like in regards to only individuals can understand like how much patience they feel like giving to anything, right? Like, and own that. And so whatever it is, you may say, hey, I've been doing this for 2 weeks and they haven't changed yet. And so it's not good enough. Okay. If that's your threshold, then own that 2 weeks and then make a decision. It could be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, whatever your threshold is, own that. But when it comes down to it, was recognized like when you're coming back to look into yourself about how you're showing up in the relationship is if you are miserable. And apart from the things like, for example, like you're being emotionally abused, physically abused, and things of that nature. I mean, that's just different cases here. But if you just feel like it's just frustrating, this same kind of arguments, or maybe you lost some intimacy, some passion, whatever it may be, if you're finding yourself miserable in that and you want them to do more, you can legitimately change your experience of them if you detach yourself from the vision. Again, I know kids complicate things or they make it more challenging. All these things are true factors. Yet and still, if you just say, hey, well, we have kids, so I'm going to continue to stay with you, even though I'm not happy with how you're showing up. I don't think you're doing the work, which now makes me feel a bit miserable and sad and unfulfilled. And so now my kids are going to see two sad, unfulfilled people who don't really want to be together anymore. And that's now what we're downloading to our kids for the betterment of the kids. Your kids deserve to see the both of you happy with somebody else. So if you have to see you happy with someone else every 2 weeks, then do that. You know, but don't use your kids as a bargaining chip as a reason why he's not making a decision. So own whatever it is for you. If you feel like you don't have the patience and it's after 1 year, then just own it. But again, don't own it and then make them the bad person for not doing the thing. It's just they're not moving at your speed, and that's also okay. You have the right to command the life you want, right? But just own it without trying to make them person the enemy.
Because there's also the acceptance of accepting who they are, the accepting the reality of who they are. That is who they are. And when we put on them that there's an expectation that they should be different, right? We are denying the one thing that we're denying reality. And when we deny reality, there's always going to be a level of unhappiness and stress that's created within us.
I don't know if you've read, I can't remember which one it is, if it's the Four Agreements or if it's the Mastery of Self-Love. It's by the same author. But essentially, and I love it because it's quite, in a lot of ways black and white, but just taking ownership of once we get to the point in time that we're trying to make someone fit our needs, we're not really accepting them. And that's okay if we don't, I don't want to say not accept them, but if what they offer, if how they be as a person doesn't excite me, doesn't make me feel, like I want to hang around and move through a journey with them, I don't have to make them change for me. But that's a lot of times what we try to do is I want to be with you, but really, do I want to be with you, or do I want to be a version of you that I painted in my mind, as we talked about in the beginning of the conversation? So who is it that you're really in love with, or who is it that you're really bought into? Oftentimes, it's the idea of this person who I think they'll be it someday. And so when they're not that person, we start putting the pressure on them. And you could do, you should, so forth and so on, as opposed to saying, hold on now, am I really accepting of this person? And if you don't, that's okay. There's no moral obligation to accept anyone how they are. And it doesn't make you a shitty person if you don't. If this person is no longer who you thought they were and they no longer excite you, they no longer get you butterflies in your stomach, they're not a shitty person and neither are you. But when we're stuck in that trying to get that person to change because they could be doing it's like, what if they did that to you? Right? If they don't accept you for who you are and how you should, would you also want that same pressure? Or would you want someone just to love, appreciate, and see all of you in wherever you are in your life? But yet we're not willing to give that to someone else, right?
So I have another program coming up in September, 12-week program this time, because I see a lot of men desiring to show up in their lives with more leadership, more expression, more connection, more depth, more openness. So I have my program, Being an Authentic Masculine Man. And in this program, really, I help men cultivate the depth they want, the deep presence and self-awareness that they haven't been able to find on their own, to really express themselves more openly and more honestly. Through the program, men have really shed a lot of shame, been able to show up powerfully in their relationships, been able to express themselves and feel confident in their dating lives, and really let go of a lot of sexual shame as well. And this is just the content, right? Like I said, the men that have been on the program in the past, they've come back and said it's completely changed their lives. It's helped them build new relationships and friendships with depth and with honesty, of openness that they never thought was possible. So if you're interested in this program, which is going to be starting in September for 12 weeks, go into the show notes and you can find all the details to sign up, and we'll have a conversation about how you can jump on. Yeah, there's a lot of this, it's almost like we meet somebody, maybe with them for some time, and then we kind of pick at the traits that we like, I like how they're like this and this. It's like it's some sort of pick and mix. Like I like these bits of them, but that licorice piece, and I'm not a fan of licorice, right. That licorice piece on the side, I'm coming back to that in a few years. I'm going to come back in a few years and we're going to get rid of that. And we slowly are wearing away and trying to, do something with that licorice piece of them we don't like. And when we get some pushback, we're almost like, oh my God, how dare they not succumb to my trying attempts of changing who they are, because I don't like the fullness of who they are. Right. And there has to be, and I say this as someone who struggled with this for many years, being relationship, and I would find faults and problems with my partners. I'd point them out. Man, I could have written a list with some of the things, right? And what's the transformation that's been for me is being like, I love the whole person. And this piece here, maybe if I had my own way, I might change it. But I'm going to do my best to send love and acceptance towards this part of them, right? Yes. Because I still love the whole person. I still want to be with the whole person. Yes. But this is part of them. This piece, this little building block here, may well support many of the other things that I really love. And for that reason, I can send love and gratitude towards that. And it's amazing how shifting our perspective, shifting our attitude towards something with someone really shifts our experience of that part of who they are, in many, many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautifully said. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but I feel a lot of times those things that we say we don't like, we like to pick out, I often find that's a perfect reflection of something within us that we can heal within ourselves. Do you know what I mean? It's almost just, again, it's a mirror, a reflection, a sign of something. And again, not to be confused with we need to accept any old behavior. That's not what I'm saying, but there's something there that you feel like, God, I wish they wouldn't do. Like, or I wish they didn't do, or they would do, where's it that you could accept, have more patience? Is that the opportunity that's teaching you to practice your patience? Is that, for example, with my wife, I'm very particular and meticulous, right? And so there's a lot of things that my wife does that before would drive me insane. And some of the things still do, but there's a lot of things that would drive me insane. Now, what I've grown to at least understand, at least what I'm telling myself, which I find a lot of truth in, is, Brian, that's really opportunities for you to practice your control that you have. I love to plan and control and have everything in its place because it makes me feel safe. It makes me feel like there's not going to be surprises. I'm not going to waste time and energy if everything is right in its place. And there's truth to that. I've been rewarded from my past experiences for having things in their place. However, now seeing that there's also been a lot of limitation in wanting to control everything. Going back to before, control of like having that our marriage fulfills this vision that I have. Because I'm so attached to the vision that I'm not letting any other movement come in. Perhaps there's a change in this vision, for example, not having kids, that is not like a better than or a less than vision. It's just our vision now. Can I release what I had before for us and say, this is what the vision is, and fall in love with that, as opposed to being so attached to this thing that I had in my mind? So now when something comes up that niggles at me with my wife, my first question is, okay, Brian, is it really that big of a deal? 9.8 times out of 10, it's not that big of a deal. And so I gamify it. So Brian, what's the learning in this? Like, what is the learning in this thing? Like, so here we can't drink the water, right? And without fail, we have a special like containers, like recycling bins. And when the bottled water's finished, we crunch it up and we put it in the bin. I don't know why. It's like my wife is allergic to crunch up the bottle and put it in the bin, right? She'll leave it on the kitchen counter empty, or she'll put it by the bin, but never crunch up and put it in the bin. Bro, when I tell you, like, I still like lose my shit. It's like, what's happening? You got this far. Like, you brought it this far. Like, just finish the job, right? And so now it's like, well, Brian, like, what's the big deal? What's happening here? What do you think is happening? Like, why is this bothering you so much? It's all this story that really means nothing. It's my idea of what it means to have a clean, tidy place. It's, her discipline or respecting our joint space. All these things I tell myself of why it is. I'm so frustrated about it. But at the end of the day, it's like, just crush it up and put it in there and keep it moving, right? But then find myself losing so much energy and patience into that thing because I'm looking at the bottle and sometimes I would leave it there. Just like, I'm not putting it in there. I'm just gonna leave it there, And every time I walk past, I just get more and more angry, Like, I am not gonna put it in there until she crushes it up. David, it's a water bottle. That's it. She didn't cheat on me. She didn't come in with a knife. She didn't pee in my bed. It's an empty water bottle. But I create this whole experience about what it should look like, We're funny. I mean, the whole dynamics of like male and female and expectation, it's just funny.
Yeah. We just create this story of what it means, the story of what it means that she doesn't she doesn't cross the water bottle and put it in the recycling. Like, what does it mean about me? What does it mean about us? What does it mean about a relationship? And we're so unaware that we're doing this because we think we're right. We think what we're thinking is how it is, and we're right and they're wrong. And this is, in my opinion, like the central piece of so many couples' persistent arguments is this story that they're holding on to of how it should be, right? And they each have this idea of how it should be. And when it's not that way, they're not really reacting to their partner. They're reacting to this little narrative, this little internal fable they have in their minds, which generates so much emotional turmoil, so much misery, so much stress. And then they project at their partner. And we're just often in this game of just doing that like back and forth. I see this with couples that are in kind of persistent arguments where they can't really communicate anymore. And you almost see them as they're fully in battle mode constantly. They're adversaries, they're opponents, right? And they just get kind of stuck in these cycles of arguments and disconnection and just rupture. And imagine that you've worked with couples like that because there's plenty of them around. And I wonder, is like, how do you help them kind of move forward out of that space of like continuous rupture into starting to heal and repair and reconnect?
So that particular, it happens throughout the entire process that I walk them through. I have a program for couples called Intentional Union. But really a lot of that heavy lifting happens in the second phase, which is a phase I called a three-dimensional truth. And in the three-dimensional truth, we recognize that there are in our union, that there are at least two truths that are equally valid and right. Like looking at a piece of art on the wall, we're seeing the same picture, the same colors, the same strokes, the same everything, and yet we have two completely interpretations of the work of art we're seeing. Likewise, the same thing in our reunion, which is also a work of art. We're having the same experience, we're seeing the same thing, the same tone of voice, everything, but yet our interpretation is completely different. And so in that, we first tackle the things that seem to be like the repeating kind of like arguments or narratives or disagreements that come up, and we just set it in the middle and we just share what each person sees, what they hear, and we're very meticulous about it. And we ask so many questions. I prompt a lot of questions to both of them and to translate and to say, well, what do you hear when he says this and when she says that? And just to observe that, right? Now, I say, again, a 3D truth, because again, in this example, you have his truth, her truth, then you have somewhere in the truth. And if you have kids in there, then you add a fourth truth in there, and it just keeps on going, right? And so in that, though, being willing to release what I believe is the truth, because I see it with my own eyes. I've heard it with my own ears. I see it. This is true for me. If I can just slow down and just say, holy shit, there's a whole other world over here, like of lived experiences, a whole other person who is literally like grown up differently than I did. What would happen if I just allowed myself to be in her shoes and see it from her perspective? And this part tends to take up a lot of time, a lot of space, because there's, like you said, there's so much attachment to our story, our perspective, and our rightness that, I really give a lot to this, because from here, once we can really get a good grasp on it, and we don't need to be fully like 100% like, oh, nothing matters anymore, I see their perspective, because that's one part of it. One part is going to see that there's two truths in here. The next part is to say, okay, cool, what do we want to do with these two truths? Like, what does this mean? So you have your perspective, I have mine. And so it could be like, oh, I can see where you're coming from, so I can accept this thing, this outcome, and vice versa. But there may be a truth and say, okay, we're acknowledging that we see two different things here. We've acknowledged that I've shared with you what I believe you see, you confirmed it, and vice versa, and we just don't agree. Now what? And so you get to choose what you want to do with this thing. This may just be a thing that you're not going to agree on. Is that okay? Or is this like a life source where you have to agree on this? And if you don't agree with this, like your relationship's going to burn, So that being able to really just stop and see the truth in what they're saying and what their experience is, and not make them wrong. Because again, when I'm talking about me going through my wife's storms, oftentimes when I get feedback from how she perceived me, I was so upset because I couldn't understand, how could you possibly see me in that light? I'm trying so hard. I'm doing everything I can. How could you see me in that? Because I know my truth is, right? But it's like, okay, well, what is her truth? One, can I see a commonality? Am I willing to admit that what she sees in me, actually there's truth in that? I agree with her. And two, like, you know what? It's okay. Like, she sees me and is experiencing me in a certain kind of way. That's her truth in that, but I know it's not true. So can we have a conversation to kind of bridge that gap? And that's where a lot of us get stuck on, especially, I think, when we talked about emotional maturity or not being as emotionally developed, is not being able to accept that someone may not perceive us the way we perceive ourselves. And that happens with everything. And even your love of your life. Like, that's a hard pill to swallow sometimes, to say, how can she not see me in that way? Like, what is the problem? And then we take it personal. I know I did for years, most of my relationship. And so I'm at this next level for me of like, Brian, it's okay. She's not always going to see me in the light that I see myself. It doesn't mean it's a good thing, it's a bad thing, it's just a thing. And I'm sure I see her in a light that sometimes she doesn't agree with. I'm not doing it to make her the demon, it's just what happens, it's human nature. So stop taking it so personal and allow her to have her experience, and later have a conversation on what's really happening so you understand each other. So that'd be a pathway.
Yeah. And it's a very powerful. It's one that I've taken in my relationship and some of the couples I work with, maybe not so much in the same path, but the similar outcome is like empathy. Empathy. Yes. Can you stand in your partner's experience and at least view I love to use objects sometimes in the sessions, right? It's like I'll grab I've got a cactus here, and sometimes I use the cactus as an example. from one side of the cactus, there's like a label on it, right? There's a label. You can see a label when you're looking at it. But for the other side, you can't see that. And that's how we are walking through the world together, right? Often in couples, it's like we're just looking at things from two opposite sides. Or, for instance, this laptop right now, I can see the screen. I can see you on the screen, and I can see some other tabs. But on the other side of the laptop is a case. And on the case, it has a photograph on it, right? So it's literally like often in our relationship, one of them is looking from the side and looking at the case, and the other person is looking at the screen. And they sit and they shout and they scream and tell the other how right they are about what they're seeing. But they never stand out of their chair, walk around and look at the other side. And it's when we do that, we have empathy, because they're you see the world the way you do because of your experiences, the things that have happened to you in past relationships, your pain, your trauma, like what color the wind was, which way the wind was blowing that day, right? But when we do that, when we stand in another person's experience, we at least can have another angle to look at things. And when we do that, my belief is when we do that enough in relationship, we are able to almost guess their angle before it happens, right? Which allows us to have kind of empathy in the moment of like, are you seeing this way? And they'll go, yeah, that's how I'm seeing it. And you're like, oh, yeah, I understand why you're saying that, because I'm seeing this thing that way. It's an acknowledgement that there are different ways to look at the same thing in the same way, because, most of these kind of persistent arguments from what I've seen is like you said, two people that are looking at the same thing, but with their own angles on it. And there's an unwillingness and a desire to win the argument or be right. Like, my belief is a lot of that winning is like we take our kind of work, corporate, patriarchy mind, and we bring it into our relationship. We're like, well, this is a winning I have to do here. I need to win. I need to be the best. I need to come up on top. And that's great when we're at work, or not so great really, to be honest. But when we bring it into our relationship, it's actually incredibly destructive, because winning isn't the most important thing, right? Connection and love and depth and, union is way more important than the kind of the winning piece.
Yeah. Poetically said. I think it helps with your accent too. Just everything makes everything sound better. So what I'm hearing is, to me, simple, but they're not easy to implement. And then my question to you is what are your thoughts on that? Why do you think it's a challenge for people to want to be empathetic or to see someone else's perspective? Because again, it's like, of course, but then it's not of course when we're in the moment, when we're in the fire, it's like, So what are your thoughts on what makes it challenging for us to be able to be empathetic or to want to win?
I think some of it's like emotional maturity. When we're, I always look at this as stage of children. It's like children only see things from their point of view, their worldview. Is everything's about them. It's self-centeredness, right? And they need to be self-centered, right? Because they're children. That's what they do, part of the growing up process. But if we don't mature out of self-centeredness, and we think that in some way, if we start seeing things from other people's point of view, that we lose ourselves, we lose our perspective, our opinions don't matter. I think there's a concern there that if I always see things from my partner's point of view, then what happens to me? Do I disappear? Do my opinions disappear? Do I become codependent? Do I only look at it from their point of view? And then I think there's some ego in there. There's like my opinions and my identity, I must protect, I must defend. So we, in the height of being triggered and emotional moments when we don't have the full kind of capacity of our minds, we default to the thing that's always been there with us, which is our identity, our ego. And then we become defensive because, the number of people that end up in these kind of arguments, even after they've worked on this, looking at other people's points of view, they can look at an argument and go, I started to get defensive. Why did I get defensive? Something happened in there that triggered me. Maybe it's something to do with, for me, it's often the biggest trigger I have to work with is like, if I feel that my freedom and my autonomy is being restricted, I suddenly go into like, oh my God, I have to protect. When it's like, my mind doesn't need to do that. I don't need to protect my freedom. I'm a free human being. But my ego gets a sense of like my freedom's being eroded or taken away, and it wants to defend it. It wants to attack my partner and become defensive. So I think there's a few pieces in there, but ultimately, simple. Like if we can regulate our nervous systems more and better in the moments that are difficult, right? The arguments and so forth, we are far less likely to get into arguments. We're far less likely to get defensive from our position, because we can see our partner not as an adversary and someone we're fighting against, but we see him from this grounded, calm, spacious place. We come from a place of love more often.
Yeah, agreed. So I'd say for anyone out there listening who finds himself in this, it's probably going to be you who's listening, so don't look at your partner, it's probably you, is a way to practice this, is I would say, is like, if you are with someone, you have your partner, is actually sit down and legitimately look at a piece of art and both share what you see. And I'm saying art because it kind of put some distance away from like something in a relationship, and it kind of builds the muscle of just being able to share without trying to make it right or anything like that, and just share. And as you guys feel more comfortable, bring something closer to the relationship. Okay, cool. So this thing that happened, that we do, that we see, whether it's raising kids or finances, or whatever it is, and in the first stage of that, just share what your perspective is on it without now trying to come to any kind of conclusion. I don't want you to try to, come to a compromise. Just practice flexing the muscle of just sharing how you guys see these two things differently. Now, if you've done that, they can start going to the practice of, okay, cool. We don't see this thing this exact same way. Now, what is a common outcome? Because what I also experience is that because they have tried in some ways to come to a compromise, and it ended up like in this big old argument, and it was tense, they don't want to go back to do it again. They don't go back and even try it again. And so just leave it, and then repeat the same pattern of like, okay, being, passive aggressive, ignoring it until it's this big boom and they have this big blowout. So if you find yourself in that, then start a bit out, give some space, piece of art, a cactus, laptop, whatever it is, and move it closer. And then once you get to something within your actual relationship, practice the art of not needing to be right, just sharing, and then try to work it out. Because again, because these bad experiences, where they come from, like our infancy, childhood, or even as an adult with previous relationships, if we're afraid we're gonna get the same result, but we're not working through it, we're never gonna have a different result. You gotta be able to practice that muscle and know you're gonna mess it up. One of you guys are gonna flip out, one of you guys are gonna get emotional, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. We avoid these places that we've been to before, that we've been hurt, Yeah. I like to talk with the couples, is like, about a feeling, like what feeling would you like to leave with, the outcome to be? What would the feeling you'd like to get out? Or also it's like talking about less about how it needs to be, the nitty gritty. It's like, what's the feeling you would like to have? Like, what feeling would you like to be between you? It's like getting an idea on these things, because when you can kind of come together and like, I'd like to feel connected, and I'd like to feel cherished, and I'd like to feel loved. And, often both of us can agree with that. Like, okay, we both like to kind of feel that. Cool. So like, what possible outcome would allow both of us to feel that? Or, start drilling down, like, what could it look like? And so forth. And you start to get somewhere, instead of it just being kind of like, it has to be like this, or we have to do this thing, because that's where we get caught in the fighting. It's like we start with the feeling, something a bit less maybe tangible for people, that allows us to kind of drill down into finding an actual solution.
Yeah, so good. And even to add on to that is, and an easy one to miss is really express what it means to you to feel loved. Right? Because what love is to you and what that makes sense to you may not be to your partner. And so kind of going back to the conversation about like doing the work, and what does it mean for them to do the work? So really, like, as you're opening this up that David's presented, I think it's beautiful. And to really be clear, like, what is it their feeling look like, so that you guys know you're on the both page? Because you may feel like, I got there, so we're good, work is done. They may not still feel loved yet, right? And so you're ready to turn up the speed here, and they're like, hey, I'm not there yet. So it's that clarity.
No, I love that. Creating that, like you said, creating that clarity. We talked a bit about like the weathering the storm, and I'm interested in your thoughts and your experiences. Like, let's preface this so people don't get offended. Oh, people get offended if they want, but
let them get offended. Let's go for it.
When I talk about women's storms, I'm coming from the position of like, women are often more adept at expressing their emotions and feeling their emotions, especially bigger emotions. And men are often less good at this thing. So and I'm sure you might have seen this, is like, you know, female partner comes and has like a reaction to something that's happened, and the man received this reaction and he is thrown by it. That can look like shutting down. That can look like being highly reactive to it, walking away, fighting, shouting back. Why do you think that as men, we really struggle with our partner's kind of emotions and feelings and reactions?
Yeah. I think that the surface stuff that can maybe be easily understood is kind of what you said before, is like we want to get to, like, to conquer, we want to get to the thing. And so when we have to understand like this new emotion, it's almost like, feels like it's more work, more energy, and we want to win it. Like we thought we understood it like a year ago or a month ago or a week ago, like we thought we had the thing. And so now when this new emotion comes, this is going to require us to really to understand this again. So I think we get tripped up on that. Two, we want things to be a bit more linear. So it's like, oh, you feel sad, you feel hurt, and so you're going to meet the solution. So you can tell me what you need, and I'm going to give you the solution. Oftentimes it doesn't come out that way. A woman is not going to say, hey, this is exactly how I feel and what I need from you. And so in that, we find it confusing. We don't know what to do. There's things that are a bit more, how you say this, less tactile. Like we want to be able to do a certain thing, as opposed to, okay, she doesn't feel love right now. She may not able to really express that she doesn't feel love right now. And it may have nothing to do with you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take some deep breaths. And maybe I'm just going to hold her. Maybe I'm just going to hold her and try that. Or maybe I'm just going to sit and listen. I'm going to shut my mouth. I'm just going to let her just like air it out. I'm not going to try to solve anything. I'm just going to listen. Right? Or maybe if she's still, feeling a bit kind of agitated. So what do you feel like you need right now? Right. There's a variety of things that are not the direct thing, because we want to be able to see problem, solution. And sometimes there's a pathway to get there that we're not so great at, right? And so I think in that, being able to practice that and understand that she's coming at it from a different place, not a wrong place, not a crazy place, it's a different place that you're accustomed to going, is if you embrace, to me, like, again, to gamify this, like this, for example, men, we're typically really good at business or solving business problems or different solutions. If it doesn't go right, we'll think of a different one. And we love to be able to figure that out. Like, we're good at that. Like, so what if you approach like your woman, the queen in your life, with the same kind of tenacity? Like, okay, cool. Like, that didn't necessarily work. Like, what's going to be the pathway to get to the thing, right? Like, and look at it differently. But oftentimes we perceive this emotion that comes at us like as a prevention of our freedom. Or a challenge or a barrier, something that's slowing me down, something that's an inconvenience. And so, of course, if you tell yourself it's all these things, like that's what it's going to be. So what it's like, okay, cool. Like, what's really the way that I can get into her world to understand what's there? And that's going to require us as men, to be able to adapt our game plan, understand like what worked before may not work now. But I also see this as an opportunity for us to level up and grow. Right? So we can say it's an inconvenience, I don't want to do it, or we can say, cool, how can I grow in this? Is there a part of me that I'm afraid to open up? Is there a part of me that if I feel like if I not offer a solution, that she's going to think I'm less of a man because I don't have a solution for her? All these things that we kind of pride ourselves on. Like, what if you actually just looked at it a little bit differently, from a different perspective, as we talked about before, and then what could be possible? I think that'd be a way to kind of approach that.
It's like almost not just being in our habitual reaction to the situation.
Oof. Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing you say is like you said, kind of gamifying it, but actually it's bringing more awareness to the situation, or not trying to squash it as fast as possible, and giving it just a bit more of a kind of energy to navigate it in the moment, instead of trying to just like problem solution, because life isn't full of problems and solutions. It's not that simple. Sometimes there's a problem and we don't know what no one knows what the problem is yet. And we need to kind of like air out everything, and then the problem kind of naturally arises, and then the solution, sometimes we don't even need a solution. Sometimes the solution also naturally arises as well.
Yeah. In this kind of like, as we're exploring this, I always find it hesitant to try to give like the thing to do, because of course, like as we talked about, everyone's so unique. Every single union is like a fingerprint, like it's so unique. And so the other possibility I want to throw out there is, and I know I've tripped up on this a lot, is sometimes can require your firmness, right? Sometimes can require your solidness as a man to not break, because she may not even know that she's testing you. She wants to see, like, are you really convicted in your values? Are you convicted to leading the marriage, or whatever it may be, whatever the issue is? And so this is like this unconscious testing that she's doing to you for you to sit down and actually say, actually, that's not acceptable. It's not the answer, right? So men, don't go out there and say what Brian said. Next time she's emotional, that's not acceptable. But only you can know, like, is your presence in this union with her, are you really solid, or do you find yourself folding, trying to be happy wife, happy life? You know, are you trying to give her whatever she wants? That way she can stay calm. And in this kind of like this waffling kind of energy, is she looking for you just to stand strong in that? Right? So there's not a one size fits all. There's always, to me, going to be an opportunity to, one, when you're in your masculine, the masculine, to me, like the king, can oftentimes, if he's solid in it, can put the crying little girl down and summon the queen forward. And sometimes that's what that solidness is going to be. But sometimes the king just kind of needs to be with the little girl. But sometimes we don't know how to be with like the emotion of it. But sometimes we need to be good and be solid and just let the little girl cry herself out, if you will. Right? And not judge her, not make her crazy, not make her bitchy or naggy or wrong for expressing that. Right? So I can't say just do these things in these steps, because I don't know the woman in your life, and I don't know you, right? But the willingness to be able to look inwards and say, okay, is there resistance on my side? Is there a place in this interaction that I don't want to go? If you can at least say yes to yourself somewhere in there, then to me that'll be a better gauge of what you could do to approach her differently, as opposed to trying to like look at her and analyze her and figure out her. What are you avoiding? What don't you want to see?
It's like having that range of different ways in responding based on the moment, upon what's happening, what's being said, what's being expressed. Like you said, there's times where, you know, it is really acceptable to say to your partner, hey, the way you're talking to me isn't acceptable, right? There's times where it's really acceptable to say that, hey, the way you're talking to me isn't acceptable. And there's a lot of men who, they won't go there because they feel that's aggressive, or that they shouldn't be that way. But it's like, actually, that's, you know, there's times where your partner, you know, men, I'm not saying it's all times, but there's times your partner, that's exactly what she needs to hear from you. Maybe she is being abusive, you know, in the way that she's talking to you in a language. And it is to say, hey, I'm not going to stand here for this. Like, the way you're talking to me is unacceptable. I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back in half an hour, and then we can have this conversation. But there's also, like you said, moments where you just be with whatever she's expressing, whatever's there for her, to allow her to move through that. And there's things to do that are everywhere in between. But what I'm getting, what you're saying is like, it's having that level of self-awareness, that connection to your own inner stillness and spaciousness and groundedness, so that you can respond in the way that's appropriate to that particular situation, and not just looking for some manual to follow.
Yeah, 100. Look, let's throw a curveball to what you just said. So cool. You recognize that every time your queen gets emotional, you fold and you want to give in. So you recognize there's an opportunity for you to stand solid and say, hey, the way you're acting, speaking isn't appropriate, right? And that thing, flip it the fuck out. She may not just say, oh my gosh, David, thank you for putting your foot down and being a king to me and calling me on my shit. Thank you. She may not say that, especially if you've never said that before in your life to her. Right? So can you, again, be confident in your approach and what your intention was, to understand that when you step up and bring a different energy that she's not accustomed to, you probably, or it's likely that you will not get the reaction that you want. But can you be okay with that? Because then that a very unconscious testing from her to maybe kind of want to get more emotional is going to see, are you going to be solid in that? Or are you going to fold? And that's okay. She's not a bitch if she gets emotional again, and you're not a bad guy if you stand firm. It's this dance that you're doing with each other. But to me, like, at the end of the day, at least my belief on, with my partner and what I do, my methodology is kind of guide couples to this, is that we're both here to help each other heal and be the best version of ourselves. I believe that. Like, there's nothing that can change my mind about that. And so in that moment, when you practice as a man to step in, lean into your partner and say, hey, that's not okay. She may not like it at first, but can you be confident enough to know that you're calling in the bigger, higher version of herself that no one may have ever done that before? She may have had her dad, her grandfather, past boyfriends always kind of crumble. She's never had someone step into her space and say, Queen, come on, let's go forward, and vice versa. So while you're doing that, you are strengthening that king energy and that solid energy in you, and then she can do the same thing for you. So to me, it goes hand in hand. But what we tend to lose ourselves is taking it personal, which I know I fell for this trap like most of my marriage and then previous relationships, is taking it personal, like they're coming at me. It's like, Brian, it has actually very little to do with you, right? So be able to be one of that. And so that's an opportunity for me to grow and to see where it is that I'm still insecure about who I am. That's all that is. If I'm getting triggered by her emotions, to me, it's just a sign of where it is that I'm not being solid, and where it is that I'm not willing to step up. It's like, cool, game on, let's go.
Yeah. I think the thing is, and it's worth also noting that like it goes both ways, right? Sometimes we as men need our partner to stand up to us and say, hey, you're being a dick. Like, there's times that my partners, come to me and said that to me very directly, very piercingly, and left me with like, oh, and I might have reacted in a moment and I've walked away and gone, I've come back and gone, hey, you're right. I'm sorry, actually, I was out of order, I was unreasonable, whatever. And often these calling forwards are not always in the moment, in the shape that we need them to be, but they help us be better people. They sharpen us. They help us, they snap us out of our habitual reactivity sometimes. They just like knock us out a little bit, and they slap a bit of sense into us. So we look at ourselves and go, oh shit, this is not how I want to show up. Like I want to be different. Yeah. And this is relating, right? This is the hardness of relating, is that sometimes it's not always going to be, softy, nicey, because we don't always pay attention to that, and sometimes we need something that feels a bit firmer, in just to help us with our own individual growth. Yeah.
It kind of makes me think of, and not to go too far off on this, but it makes me think of like where a lot of men, especially myself included, like when I got into the men's workspace, around men's groups and things of that nature, I wasn't accustomed to feeling the directness of the masculine, because every time like I associate like the masculine directness with my father was he was upset with me, he was going to punish me like with a belt or something like that, or yell at me. And so I didn't understand, like, so when I first got into that space and men were very direct with me, it made me feel threatened or afraid, or I took it personal, right? It was like an attack, because like they're trying to say I did something wrong, because usually my dad brought it is because in his eyes, I did something wrong. But it's for both partners to be able to look to me at that higher version and to see the calling forward.
Yeah.
Now, people can confuse the calling out and the calling forward. Some people use it synonymously. To me, it's very different. If I'm calling my queen forward and I say, hey, that's not your highest self, I'm not judging you. Like, if you want to be in that, you need some more time to be in that, cool, be in that. But if it's now going on day 2, day 3, week 5, and you're still in it, I'm going to call you forward to come out of it, and vice versa. Now, to me, when both partners are in this together, like understanding that they're in this to grow together, and that they are our best reflection, because they see all of our shit, the good, the bad, the ugly, the in between, they see all of it, right? We can give them that trust to be able to see the best in us and to call that version of us out. But if I've accepted that about myself, every time that she calls me out on that, I'm going to be butthurt about it, because I'm going to take it defensively. She's trying to hurt me. She's trying to judge me. No. It's not about that. I see it. So cool. If I can see it and own it, then please, next time you see it from the outside, let me know so I can grow from this, So it's such an intricate dance, but such a beautiful dance at the same time, if we're on the same page, the same wavelength.
Yeah. And it's a very nuanced piece as well, as he said there's a calling out, there's calling forward. And I always think that the calling out is often feels, the intention is not necessarily to help someone, but actually to maybe put them down and create shame. Yeah. Like, you've done something wrong, you've done something bad. Yeah. Whereas a calling forward is like, I believe in you. Yeah. I believe that you are capable of better, of more, or different, or like an expanded version of you. And I know it's there, and I'm trying to tease that out of you. I'm not, my intention is not to say, call you out on something you've done bad and wrong and say how bad and wrong and show to everyone else how bad and wrong you are. But in fact, to say, hey, I know there's a higher part of you, and I'm talking to this part. Come on, come forward and step up.
Yes. And that's a gift. Whether it's in a men's space, that's in your relationship. Like, if you both can do that, that's a freaking gift. that someone sees the best in you and they don't accept, like, again, the quote unquote lower self. Now, I don't want to insinuate or imply that if you have a bad day, you're a bit emotional, you need to always suck it up and get on with it. No, like if you're feeling some kind of emotion, like be able to move through that. That's cool. But then if your partner sees that you're kind of wallowing in this, then if you guys can create some kind of agreements or some kind of what this looks like to help each other out of it, even better, because last thing you want to do is two sad people, two depressed people who's like supporting each other's lower selves, if you will, lower vibration, and then you're both stuck in it, but that's just my truth on it.
Yeah. And it's just like, I see that's part of my relationship. It's like, how can we call out higher and higher versions of ourselves on a more regular basis? It's part of what I call support in a relationship. Like both me and my partner are both coaches, and there's days where I come in and I'm like, oh man, like maybe I shouldn't be doing this and and she'll just fucking blast me,
Yeah.
She'll not like shout at me, she'll blast me with like maybe she use these words, maybe she'll be like, do you know who the fuck you are? Like, look at what you've created in people's lives. Like, look at how you've guided people, this person, that person, this couple, that couple, and you're like, oh shit, yeah, I've forgotten about that. It's like, because we're self-forgetting us as human beings. We almost forget that we are these gifted and creative beings, and we remember ourselves as being something small and tiny, inept and incapable. And part of my opinion, part of relating and being in a relationship is us going, I see you, and I will speak to that part of you, that grandness in you, and I will continue to speak to that until I can call more of it forward.
Yeah. And the other, subtle part to that is what I'm finding in couples, and even myself as well in the beginning. My wife, but she's still always been good at this. But because I couldn't see what she saw in me, I used to reject that a lot. And so for yourself, if you find that when your partner is seeing the best in you and you feel maybe either it's rejection, frustration, anger, or disbelief, then again, is it the fact that, is that the reason why you're taking it as criticism when they call you forward? Because you don't want to avoid that, because you don't also see that bigness in you? Basically, so just last night, just real quick, it made me think of, I saw The Matrix again last night. And every time I saw it, I get a message out of it. So Neo goes to the Oracle, and Morpheus is like, yes, you are definitely the one. You need to go to the Oracle, and she's going to just confirm that you are the one, just to make sure, even though I know, like, I've taken you out of this. I've created my whole life. This whole ship is based on you being the one. So Neo goes in, he gets in the Oracle. She's like baking cookies and stuff like that. And she essentially gets to the point, she goes, do you know why Morpheus brought you here? He says, yeah, well, he thinks that I'm the one. And she goes, well, what do you think? Are you? He goes, no. And she goes, you have your answer. You're not, right? And so, but later on in that kind of dialogue, she was also saying, she said something to the effect of yet. So my point that I'm getting is even though, because he said, like, I am not the one, she's like, then you're not. If that's your belief that you are not that thing that you are not. And so in our relationships, like if your partner says, gosh, you're such a powerful man, you're committed, you're loyal, I see the best in you, but I internally feel like I'm not, and I start rejecting that, it's going to feel like she's putting poison at me when really she's giving me medicine. And so being able to see the medicine in that calling forward, and sometimes I may feel like a call out, is going to be a game changer for any relationship. I say specifically for men, because we attach so much of our identity of what it means to be a good husband, lover, partner to this feedback, So anyway.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Our beliefs are, that's a whole another different podcast episode, but the way our beliefs shape our world and our relationship is incredible. But this conversation has flown by. I've just seen the time and how we've been talking. It's been so glorious to discuss these bits and pieces, the storm, and how we can call each other forward and so forth. I'm imagining the listeners are, really excited to find out where they can hear more from you, where they can work from you. I'd love you to share, anything you've got going on.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, this time to go fly by. Look at the time; it's nearly 2 hours, or an hour and a half. So, best place to find would be the Instagram page, which is just my name all together, no spaces, no underscores. Brian with an I, Christian Jenkins. You can go to my website. It's the same thing, brianchristianjenkins.com. It's going through a revamp right now, so you can use it as a reference. But that's the best way to get information about my couples program, which is Intentional Union, or my program for men, which is Man Unshakable, getting men to be prepared to, again, weather their wife's or their partner's storm. But more importantly, the outcome is to get you good with you before you step into a relationship. And a new one that I've only rolled out 2 months ago is Awakening the Goddess for women. I've come across a lot of women in relationships who have lost their voice, who've lost their sense of passion and desire because they want to be labeled as being bitchy or being too much and all these different things. And so, helping connect the women to their power without losing themselves in the process. And so, if any of those sound like something to be interesting, please just have a conversation with me about it, and we can let you know if it's the right fit for you or not.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'll put all the links down below into the show notes, man. And I just want to say a huge thank you to you today for all your wisdom and your knowledge and your experience. It's been an absolute pleasure and a wonderfully free-flowing and conversation.
Yeah. Likewise, brother. So thank you for the work you do. Honestly, I've been looking at you from I was going to say afar, but we're literally like an hour flight away. So not too far. And being inspired by how you show up, on your podcast, on your work and material, and seeing the personal work you do, I'm still keeping yourself leveled up. I value that a lot with people in this space who keep on leveling themselves up. So just thank you for being an inspiration for others, but also for myself. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
And
listeners, to come to the episode, I'm sure you've learned a few things in this episode. Feel free to reach out to myself or Brian just to let us know, what is it that you take from this episode? Maybe there's some little tidbits and little bits of advice that you've brought into your relationship and you're like, I'm going to try that. Let us know. It's always nice to hear from listeners. We never complain when you hear from listeners to the podcast that enjoyed something. What they agreed with or disagreed with, it's always welcome. Yeah. You can find the links down below in the show notes. But until next week, people, ciao, ciao. I want to say a big thank you for listening. It's people like yourself that really help get the podcast out into the world, especially if you're often sharing the episodes and the podcast with people that you feel just could do with listening, right? Can see a different way of being a man, maybe a different way of having dating lives and intimacy and relationships. So I want to say a big thank you. And if maybe after listening to this episode, you think, there's someone actually who could really do with this, please share it with them, share the love. I'm really, really grateful. And if you want to get in contact with me for any questions, or you want to talk about coaching or any working together, feel free to reach out to me on Instagram @theauthenticman_, or you can email me hello@theauthenticman.net. Thank you very much.